Warhammer 3 is fast approaching, hopefully within the next few months, but we still don't know too much about it. Other than the factions and a few little bits and bobs, we're still in the dark. This leaves us room to still dream and hope for certain features to make it into Warhammer 3. Maybe there's some changes you'd like to see, I know things I'd like to see, and that is what I'm going to tell you in this video. 5 things that I would like to see added to Warhammer 3. Some of these are completely realistic and entirely possible, but others are probably a bit hopeful, but would be nice additions, I reckon. And this is going to be things that I don't believe CA has made any comments on, and I'll leave out the obvious things like sieges. We all want to see those change, of course, but CA have said they're doing something with those. Or perhaps that infantry and cavalry are slightly underpowered. They have mentioned, I think, that they're trying to rework those to make them a little bit more viable than they currently are in Warhammer 2. So here is 5 changes I'd like to see in Total War Warhammer 3. Thing number 1. Campaign unit caps. So in any Total War Warhammer campaign, you usually end up with incredibly powerful armies full of the best units, which makes most settlement garrisons and enemy armies pretty easy to deal with, which can suck a lot of the challenge out of Total War campaigns. Or of course people go for the Doomstack option these days, which is pretty popular, where you just bring one of the same kind of unit for most or all of the army, and you somewhat cheese your way to victory, simply giving the enemy a matchup they can't deal with, or just using the auto-resolve to win easily every time. Now that's all well and good. If you're into playing like that, go for it. The option is there, the game allows you to do it, there's nothing wrong with it. It is a very optimal way to play, and that's how some people like to play, the most optimal, efficient way possible, and that's absolutely fine. The problem though is for those of us who like to play a more traditional Total War game, trying to fight battles with military strategy and tactics like the battles of old. Using balanced armies, we don't just want to bring one unit and then just left click once and then GG, on we go. This means that if you're someone that wants to play a more traditional balanced army Total War, you have to self-impose restrictions or use mods which give campaign unit caps. Now recently, in the past few months, I've tried out a bunch of these, and I did really enjoy the experience of not being able to have OP armies for the most part. I played a Response campaign, I did this on stream. This was with the tabletop caps mod. There was a bunch of them that I tried out, but I think this one was my favorite. This is the campaign I felt the most restricted with it anyway. So with this one, you have the core units with the little green gems. You can have an infinite amount of those units. They're all the low tier ones. But the special and rare units, which are mid and high tier units mostly, you are limited on. You can only have a few of those in each army, so it does force you to have a mixture of different kinds of units. So this was a nice restriction that stopped your army becoming too powerful, allowing you to just steamroll from settlement to settlement, army to army. So yeah, it added a nice bit of challenge, which I didn't have to force upon myself. It was just how the game worked. So with this, if I wanted to play most optimally and efficiently, I could do that without cheesing the game. And I'm not saying take away Doomstacks and stop people doing it. I know a lot of people enjoy it, and that's fine. But give us the option. Add a little tick box at the start of a campaign. Do you want unit caps on or off? Yes or no? Just like we can turn the Chaos Invasion on or off, allow us to have unit caps on or off. This may conflict with some factions that already have unit caps kind of worked into their mechanics, like the Beastmen or the Tomb Kings, but I'm sure there's a workaround. And given the fact that a bunch of modders have already done it successfully, it seems like a completely plausible thing to add to the game to please the best of both worlds. So please CA, give us campaign unit caps as an option. Thing number 2. Multiplayer improvements, please. Multiplayer in Total War games has long been unloved. Shogun 2 was the last game to really make any effort with multiplayer, and since then it's just been a very simple basic experience, and kind of understandably so, not a large portion of Total War players do play multiplayer, but I definitely think there's enough of an audience to warrant some nice quality of life changes, at least. Because currently in Warhammer 2, if you want a decent multiplayer experience, you have to go to one of the organized communities, like my Discord, Turin's Discord, any of the tournament Discords. These places are organized and people play fairly, with a whole bunch of, again, self-imposed restrictions and rules, because the in-game official Total War multiplayer experience is just really quite bad. You have quick battles, which can very often be a cheese fest, and you'll have people corner camping and things like that, and it's just not a nice experience, especially if you're a new player and you come to try out multiplayer, and quick battles becomes your point of reference for multiplayer. That's not good. That's going to put a lot of people off. and the various communities have rule systems, banner rules, and pick and ban systems so people can pick fairly. And those are the kinds of things that we need to see. For example, here's a simple idea for fixing counterpicking. And if you don't know what counterpicking is, let's say we've just joined a quick battle here, both factions spawn in as beastmen. Now what one player might decide to do is simply wait for the other guy to pick his faction so that he can then counterpick and pick a faction that has an advantage over the enemy's faction. So for example, let's say I joined and I pick Vampire Counts, right? So he can now see that and go, okay, I know which faction has an advantage over the Vampire Counts, the Lizard Men. So that's who I'm going to play. And he naturally gives himself an advantage, which isn't fair because he gets to do that, but I don't. It's like playing rock, paper, scissors, but instead of both people going at the same time, one person goes first. And then what do you think happens? Well, this can easily be remedied by a simple system like this. When you join a battle, you're met with question marks and a red ring around it to show that you don't know what the enemy faction is and that they haven't chosen their faction yet. Once they cycle through the factions, find the one they want, they press ready, and then their faction is locked in, and they wait for the other player to choose their faction. Once both rings turn green, then you reveal the factions to the players and lock them in. They cannot change now that they're locked in. If one player decides that they don't like the match they've seen and that they've been accidentally, unfortunately counterpicked and they decide to leave, well then they're hit with a penalty. You can't queue again for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, or you lose some rank on the leaderboard. Punish people for not taking the matches just because they don't like the matchup. There you go. There's a system that solves counterpicking. You're welcome, CA. Send my check in the mail quickly, please. Another thing I've always thought is kinda silly is the fact that quick battles are called quick battles. If someone's brand new to the game and they see quick battle and they think, oh, that's a good way to just get into a battle quickly. Oh no, son, that's the ranked battles, where the sweaty tryhard kids often go. And also, who the hell is ever looking for a quick battle? Who's really in a hurry to play a multiplayer match? Why is it called quick battle? Call it ranked battles, goddammit. And then we have the leaderboard, which means nothing, really. When you play your quick battles, you're actually getting ranked with a rating, which is just a random number, 56,000, 60,000, 30,000, 40,000. No idea how you obtain that other than playing a lot of battles and obviously winning them. No explanation on how the ranking system works. We need a proper ranking system. Give us a bronze, silver, gold tiers, platinum tiers. Give us a proper ranking system like so many games have nowadays. And let people see who they're facing. Put up a little badge so that you can see that someone is a top 10 player, or a brand new player who's playing their first game. Of course, it would be nice to separate those players from each other, but there's really not enough players in quick battles to do that, unfortunately, so sometimes a brand new quick battle player will be facing the top 10 players, which is, of course, pretty unfortunate. A better unit capping system would of course go a long way. In proper tournaments, they don't use the unit caps that CA provide with the toggleable option. They actually just have their own rules, which are very similar to the unit caps, but unit caps isn't great. It is a little bit broken sometimes. People find exploits for them. You can bring like 10 heroes and stuff like that. So yeah, just putting in a proper unit cap system for multiplayer that works would be great as well. Also, more detailed map information would go a long way in multiplayer, because all we see is this, which doesn't really tell you anything. If you compare these two maps, can you tell which one is a small map and which one is a huge open map? No, we can't. All we have is a random picture that, again, mostly means fuck all. We can tell a little bit of what the elevation is like. We can see some obstacles, but even water isn't really that well indicated. And this stuff is very important when not only choosing your faction, but also building your army. If you're on a tiny little map with not a lot of room to maneuver, you probably won't want to bring a lot of cavalry, because you won't be able to move it around that easily on this small map. But we have no way of knowing whether this map is actually small. You get the idea, right? We need more map information. It's a simple thing to add. Let's get it done, CA. Pretty please. The only thing we have of multiplayer news for Warhammer 3 is that we're getting a domination game mode, something that nobody asked for, so hopefully we'll at least get some of these kind of changes, improvements to the quality of life, because that is the kind of stuff that people are asking for. That's what the multiplayer community would like, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, let's hope multiplayer gets some love in Warhammer 3. On to thing number 3, give us a better camera. So we have the standard and classic Total War camera. Now, these are fine for the most part for most people, right? You can zoom down plenty low enough to the ground to get stuck into the action if you want to. And this is okay for people like me, creators that need to capture footage and things, but it could be a little bit lower so we can get better angles on the models. You can also zoom out reasonably far. This is as far as it goes, which is okay. This is kind of a medium-sized army though. If it was wider, I would have a hard time seeing my entire army in one shot, especially when I'm moving the army up and trying to move everything around. And that is very often what happens, at least in multiplayer, when you're trying to see everything that's going on. You can't really do it with the standard camera, and you have to move around for the most part, unless your army is really small, or unless everything's just happening in one place on the battlefield. You'll probably find this camera a bit of a struggle, especially if you are playing an extra wide army, or you're bringing your army in from loads of angles and directions and it's just spread out all over the place. You want to be able to see it all, but you can't with the standard Total War cameras. This leads a lot of people to using the debug camera, which can be acquired through a quick and easy script change by anybody. And this simply unlocks the limits of the camera, so you can literally go as high as you like, or as low as you like, through the floor and down into hell, potentially. Now, while this is easily doable by anybody, you can do this in less than 5 minutes, pretty simply, if you have a Google. But of course, CA isn't going to put this in the game as standard, because they don't want people to see outside the edges of the map and to go underneath the floor like this. So we can't really expect them to make debug camera an option in the actual game, which is fine. Now, the problem here is that the debug camera can be used in multiplayer, and it is the option that a lot of players choose, especially at the pro level. Being able to see the entire battlefield all of the time is a substantial advantage over somebody just using the standard cameras who can't see the entire battlefield all of the time. You'll be able to see all of the unit matchups all of the time, see where your bad ones are, get them out easy, see where your routed units are and bring them back to battle, see any flanking or vanguard units that are coming up behind you really easily. All advantages somewhat over someone just using the standard camera. And it's not a huge advantage by any means, it's not a game breaker or anything. I know there are some pro players that do just use the standard camera, so it's not essential to be good at the highest level of Total War or anything, but it does create a slight disadvantage for those who A, either don't want to use the debug camera or can't use the debug camera, or B, those who simply don't know that the debug camera exists. I am in the A category because I would like to use the camera, but I can't because of making videos, and sometimes when you use the camera down low, the debug camera down low, it acts weirdly, it slows down, it speeds up weirdly, and as someone who streams this game and things, I like to get down and get some close-ups sometimes. It's not really great to have that kind of mess around with the speed and control, so I can't really use the debug camera, which is a little bit annoying. But what I can do is use the better camera mod, as it's literally called. This is great. I use this in campaign, but it can't be used in multiplayer because it's a mod. You can see it brings the camera down much lower, maybe a little too low in some situations. It does clip through the floor, but only a little bit. This is as low as this camera can go, and this is as high as it can go, which is higher than the standard camera, and now I can see my entire army, but it could still go a little bit higher, I think. But this is all I'm asking for, just some height on the camera mostly. A little bit lower would be nice, but that's only really for people like me that are trying to get shots and angles for footage, for videos. Most of you don't care about that, and it isn't really necessary. So all we really need is for the camera to go a fair bit higher so that we can see our entire army all of the time. It doesn't have to be a completely unlimited camera. You can put a cap on how high we can go, but then we at least have the choice to basically use the debug camera without actually having to use the debug camera, and then those people that use the debug camera don't have that advantage anymore because everybody has the option. It's just going to help level the playing field of multiplayer. So pretty please, CA, give us a little bit more height on that camera, because there's not really anything to lose by doing this. The game isn't going to look any worse or anything, but it does allow players to be a little bit more efficient and not have to go into the script and use the debug camera. This one, I imagine, is a pretty easy change to make. I don't know anything about game development, but I imagine it's just changing a number to adjust the maximum height that we can scroll out the camera to. That should be an easy and completely plausible change for Warhammer 3. Come on, CA. Don't let us down. Thing number 4. This one is probably a bit ambitious to hope for, but I think it would really improve some quality of life stuff. We need more useful controls. So a few ideas to get through here. Let's start with the most ambitious one that might not be possible but would be a really nice feature. Let's say you have your save preset armies that you use for multiplayer. Anyone that really gets into multiplayer will use these a lot. When you come to the battlefield in deployment, you then have to set it all up every single time. Wouldn't it be nice to just have a button that did it all for you? You could just save a preset formation, because Lord knows this button down here, set formation button, is 100% completely useless. Who has ever used this button? I've got nearly 2,000 hours in Warhammer 1 and 2. I've never used this button ever. because as you can see, it doesn't put you in any kind of useful formation. It puts infantry at the edges that have no business being out there by themselves. What we need is cavalry or anti-large units at the edge. If we use the missile front formation, it's just as bad. We got some cavalry at the edges, okay, it's done one thing correctly. But we're just in a big long line, in just a big jumble of madness of nothing. It doesn't mean anything. This is just a useless button that sets us up for a good old line of death. So, quite honestly, this button needs to go. Why have a button on your UI that does absolutely nothing that nobody uses? Certainly no one's using it in multiplayer, and I imagine nobody uses it in campaign. I certainly haven't. Do you use it in campaign? I'll wager not. So when I have to set up this large greenskins army, I have to do this every single time, arranging all the units mostly individually, and it just takes a minute or two. Wouldn't it be nice to just have that done in 1 second with the quick push of a button, where you could save the army formation preset to the build that you've saved? Maybe that's a little bit too complicated, like I say, not sure it's entirely possible, but goddamn would it be a nice feature. Of course, there's the issue that deployment zones are different sizes and things like that, but hey, if the deployment zone's too small for the saved formation, you just squish it down and then they'll have to sort it out. But something like this would just give a nice bit of flow to the deployment phase. We don't have to painstakingly lay out our army every single unit at a time now. We can just hit one button, done. That would be a lovely feature. Like I say, probably a bit ambitious, sounds a bit complex to try and link a set formation to a saved build and stuff like that, but the set formation buttons we currently have are utterly useless. So here's another idea what you could do with those formations. Get rid of, just fuck that formation button off, alright? And put this button here instead. We'll call it the stagger button. So when you select a line of troops that you want, perhaps as your front line, you can simply come down here, click one button, and boom. These units are now staggered away so that you don't have to worry about all your units being in a line and getting taken out by a wind spell. And or a button that allows you to space your units out laterally. So select your units, come down to the bottom, click the button, and boom, your units are spread out nice and wide in one simple click. This saves so much time than having to spread them out like this manually. Or perhaps a button that incrementally spreads them out wider and wider the more you hit it. There's just so many ideas that could be useful and just help us set up our armies that little bit quicker. Again, it's not a game breaker that we can't do these things, but it is a bit tedious to have to set up large armies all the time. How much easier would it be if you could just click one button, or at least a few buttons to just spread things out easier, put them in like a square box formation like my cavalry here. There's a whole bunch of ways they could make useful little controls to help us arrange our armies more efficiently. My next issue with the controls is with the grouping system, unlocked and locked groups. This is an unlocked group at the moment, which, when you select all of those units and tell them to attack, they will all attack the same unit, which obviously isn't that useful because usually you don't want this, especially with a front line. With an unlocked group as well, when you select a formation that you set up and you move it with a simple right click, it will lose the formation that you put them in. They went from a staggered line to a straight line now, not what we wanted. So unlocked groups are only really good for single units, which defeats the point of it being a group, right? Now, if we use a locked group with Ctrl-G or simply selecting the padlock to lock the group, this now adds a bunch of controls to the group, some of which are useful. One of the first things it can do is assign your units attack orders automatically when they get close to the enemy. So they'll individually pick their closest targets and go after them. But this very often leads to this happening. You can see they've targeted the missiles at the front, but now the missiles are running to the back and the clan rats are at the front, but they don't change targets. So now my orc boys have missed their chance to get a good charge in because they just ran into clan rats instead of actually charging them. So this feature is again mostly useless. Nobody in their right mind really used this or trusts this to get them good matchups when charging up their units. One of the useful things locked groups can do though is save the formation that you locked the group in. So when I have these units of cavalry, I don't want them all bunched up together in a line because it makes them easier to kill. So I've got them staggered and spread out like this, which means when I just do a simple right click, they're nice and easy to move and they stay in that formation. I can move them around in that staggered formation nice and easy. Same on this side with my other cavalry, they stay staggered, which helps out their safety of getting wind spelled or shot by artillery and missiles. However, that damn auto attack order thing when you click a target kind of ruins it, because when I do this with missile units, I want them to all focus fire the same unit, but they don't. They select their targets when they get close, and you can see they've selected a couple of different targets, and this is not what I wanted. I wanted to focus fire down a single unit with all three of mine, but I can't do that with a locked group. I'd have to unlock the group and then do it. But then when I try to move them around in the unlocked group, I won't save my formation anymore. So you can see it's just a big faff, and doesn't allow for effective, efficient movement of your army. All that really needs to happen with this, I think, is to take away that auto-attack order. Get rid of the auto-attack stuff. It's not that useful. Again, I don't think anybody really uses it because it doesn't choose its targets reliably well, so it's just a risk to even use. Get rid of it, then we can use locked groups, keep our formation. Locked groups also keep your units at the same speed. If you want to move your entire army at the same speed, they allow for that, so that's another nice feature. But I think the auto-attack stuff that happens with a locked group is really kind of holding back what you could do with locked groups, holding your formations and keeping your units from getting into silly positions and making themselves vulnerable. And my last gripe with the controls is a pretty big one that's been an issue since Warhammer 1, and I'm surprised I haven't complained about it more until now. But you cannot assign hotkeys for half of your UI. You can assign hotkeys to run, melee mode, halt, and groups, but you are not allowed any hotkeys at all for guard mode, fire at will, and skirmish. The three most important buttons on that goddamn UI bar. It just doesn't make any sense to not allow those three buttons to be assignable. I don't know whether it's oversight by somebody at CA or they just decided that, hey, they don't need hotkeys for those buttons, but we really do. It's a lot more work to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the screen and back up to change those buttons on individual units all the time. We need hotkeys for them. And similarly, with magic and abilities, we have a similar issue. Magic, you can assign hotkeys. Alt 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 by default, and you can change those. But hero abilities, oh no. Those are not allowed to be assigned hotkeys because it's illegal? I don't know. Why is only half of the UI assignable to hotkeys? Why is the important stuff not assignable to Come on now. Come on now. It's been 5 years of this bullshit. Give us our goddamn hotkeys. It's not like it's a difficult task, right? It's just assigning buttons to abilities. I'm sure that is not a difficult thing to program. Again, I don't know anything, but I don't think it would be, right? And here's the comedy of the situation. You could do this 10 years ago in Shogun 2, where you could toggle guard mode with an assignable key, along with everything else. So yeah, some strange inconsistencies with the controls, a bunch of features that just aren't useful and I don't think anybody uses, like the formations button or the auto-attack orders in locked groups. Why have them in the game if nobody is using them? And there's a bunch of other things that we could have that would be much more useful to people, like being able to space out units, etc. You get the idea. CA, sort us out. And lastly, thing number 5, anti-snowball mechanics. So very often in Total War campaigns, once you get the hang of them, it can be pretty easy to make yourself very powerful. Get yourself a lot of money, get yourself some powerful armies, and then it's just a case of steamrolling the rest of the map to win the campaign. And this often gets boring. Unfortunately, as much as it does sound fun to just steamroll everybody, it's actually really not that fun. The fun is where the challenge keeps at you throughout the entire campaign, but Total War doesn't really do that because we can get too powerful too easily, essentially. So what we need is something to knock us down a peg or two, which I'm not sure if they've commented on this and whether they are trying to put some anti-snowball stuff in there. We have seen it recently in Total War Troy, which got some anti-snowball mechanics in the form of administration, which now puts burden on you the bigger you get. The more settlements you have, the more armies you have. It basically increases the cost of running all of those things. So you need more food, you need more metals for armor and things like that. So it would be nice to have this kind of system in Warhammer 3, and it's very possible that this was implemented into Troy as kind of a tester to put into Warhammer 3. Possibly. Because it seems like a lot of people from who I've spoken to in my community and my chat and stuff on streams, a lot of people don't finish their campaigns. They simply play until they get bored. I personally like to try and finish them, but I do have a bunch of unfinished campaigns that I keep telling myself I'm going to go back to and finish, but still haven't done it because I guess there's just not that exciting reason to go back and do it. And now that Warhammer 3 is nearly here, I'm probably not going to. But if things were a bit more of a challenge and I didn't just get pretty powerful and unstoppable within 100 or 200 turns, I'd probably finish more campaigns. So yeah, if you added some anti-snowball mechanics, made it a little bit tougher throughout the entire campaign, instead of just making it somewhat tough at the start, and then you turn into a beast and you just destroy everybody, I think I'd more likely finish my campaigns, as would many people. And when I played that Response campaign with the unit caps, I found that was a nice limit, and it kind of did act as an anti-snowball, because I couldn't have big strong armies and just steamroll everybody. The challenge stayed there through the entire campaign, and I enjoyed that entire campaign to the end. But maybe that's just another reason for campaign unit caps, because that will act as an anti-snowball mechanic in itself. So yeah, it would be nice to see more limitations on players to make it more difficult to become super powerful. I think that would make the campaigns more interesting and keep people playing until the end of their campaign. So there we go. 5 things I'd like to see change in Warhammer 3, although it's probably like 10 things really with all the multiple things, but you get the ideas. What do you reckon? Do you disagree or agree with any of this? Do you have any ideas of your own? Let me know. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. See you in the future.